I was adopted at birth and never knew my real family. At 35, I did a DNA test for fun. It matched me to a billionaire who died 3 months earlier. His lawyers contacted me. You're his only son. He left you everything, his yacht, his penthouse, his $94 million company, and his rare gold vault. But they also said one line: someone tried to block your name from the will. When they told me who and why, I froze. Let me take you back to the moment when everything I thought I knew about myself started to crumble. I was sitting in the back of my shop, eating a ham sandwich during my lunch break. The shop smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, an aroma I'd gotten used to over the years. The sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, casting golden beams across the worn wooden floor. A small, quiet space where nothing much ever happened until it did. I had just spit into a tube for a DNA test Meredith, my wife, had bought me as a birthday gift. She thought it would be fun, a way to see if I was secretly related to royalty or something. We both laughed about it. I wasn't particularly interested. After all, I had a good life. A simple life. My shop, Second Life Furniture, was just that, nothing fancy but fulfilling. I worked in old furniture, pieces that had stories, pieces that deserved a second chance. I loved it. It was enough. The results arrived 6 weeks later. I wasn't expecting much. I clicked open the app, thinking I'd see the usual pie chart with a breakdown of some European ancestry. But what I saw instead stopped me cold. A name appeared on the screen. Edmund Hollister, and next to it the word, father. I didn't recognize the name. I had never heard of Edmund Hollister in my life. My fingers shook as I typed it into Google. The first result that came up was an obituary. Edmund Hollister, billionaire industrialist and founder of Hollister Industrial Manufacturing, had died of pancreatic cancer just 11 weeks earlier. He was 67 years old, survived by a wife named Vivien, and no children. Or so I thought. I sat there, staring at the obituary. My sandwich sat forgotten on the workbench. I read it again. Edmund Hollister had built an empire, factories, a yacht, a penthouse in Manhattan. He was a man who had everything. But according to the obituary, he died without ever knowing I existed, or so I thought. 3 days later my phone rang. A New York number. I almost didn't answer. I was still processing the shock of the DNA results, trying to wrap my head around what they could mean. But I picked up. Mr. Marsh? The voice said. Calm and professional. My name is Hayes Moreland. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Edmund Hollister. I need to speak with you about an urgent matter. My stomach dropped. My mind raced. Was this a scam? Was someone messing with me? Then Hayes said something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Marsh, I also need to inform you that 3 days before your father passed away, someone filed an emergency petition to remove your name from his will. They tried to erase you completely. I don't know what I expected, but it sure wasn't that. Who would do something like that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hayes paused. Vivien Hollister, he said, your father's wife. And when you hear why she did it, you'll understand why your father was so desperate to find you before it was too late. And just like that, the life I thought I knew shattered. The phone call from Hayes Moreland felt like the start of a bad dream. I had barely processed what I'd seen on the DNA test results, and now here was a lawyer, telling me that my biological father had been desperately trying to find me before his death. It was too much to take in all at once. I was still sitting in the back of my shop, my mind spinning. The walls around me were lined with old furniture, chairs, tables, cabinets, all waiting to be brought back to life. It was a quiet place, a place where nothing ever felt urgent. But now the sense of calm I had grown so used to seemed like a distant memory. My world was shifting, the pieces falling into a new, unrecognizable pattern. The voice on the other end of the line was steady, professional. Mr. Marsh, Hayes said, I'm an attorney representing the estate of Edmund Hollister. I need to speak with you about an urgent matter. I had almost hung up. It sounded like a scam, a cruel joke someone might play on a guy who wasn't even sure he wanted to know his biological father. But then Hayes said something that made my chest tighten. Mr. Marsh, I also need to inform you that 3 days before your father passed away, someone filed an emergency petition to remove your name from his will. They tried to erase you completely. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had tried to erase me. From everything. From the life I didn't even know I had. Who would do something like that? I asked, my voice shaky despite my best effort to sound calm. Vivien Hollister. Hayes answered, his tone flat, as though this was just another fact to be stated. Your father's wife. And when you hear why she did it, you'll understand why your father was so desperate to find you before it was too late. My mind raced. Vivien Hollister. The name felt foreign. I didn't know her. I didn't even know Edmund Hollister until a few days ago. But here I was, suddenly wrapped up in a world of inheritance, secrets, and lies. I wasn't prepared for any of it. Why would she do that? I asked, barely able to form the words. Why would she try to block me from his will? Hayes didn't answer right away. There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if he was weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke again, his voice taking on a somber tone. "She's been trying to erase you for years, Mr. Marsh," he said. "She's the reason your father gave you up in the first place. She's the one who convinced him that acknowledging you would ruin his reputation. She made sure he never knew you existed, and when he started looking for you, she did everything she could to stop him. She thought if she could stop your name from being in the will, she could keep the past buried." The weight of his words sank in. The woman who had been married to Edmund Hollister for years had been the one to push him to abandon me. She had hidden me from the man who had been my father. She had made sure that I stayed forgotten. And now, Hayes continued, she's trying to block your claim to his estate. Your father left everything to you, but Vivien is doing everything she can to stop that from happening. The more Hayes spoke, the more my head swam. I had so many questions, too many to even ask. Why had Edmund never tried to find me before? Why had Vivien gone to such lengths to keep me hidden? How was I supposed to handle all of this? $1 billion inheritance. A family I never knew existed. I need to meet with you, Mr. Marsh. There's a lot more to this than you realize. Your father left instructions for me to find you, and he wanted you to have everything he built. But Vivien is going to make sure that doesn't happen without a fight. You need to understand what you're getting into. I swallowed hard, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had never wanted any of this, but now I didn't have a choice. I had to know the truth. I had to understand why I was being kept a secret for 35 years. Where do we go from here? I asked, the words slipping out without thinking. I'll arrange a meeting, Hayes said. I'll take you through everything. But you need to come to New York. I hesitated. I was just a small-town furniture restorer. I fixed old chairs for a living, nothing glamorous. And now, suddenly, I was being thrust into a world of billionaires, estates, and family secrets. I'll be there, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I need to know what's going on. I'll come to New York. After I hung up the phone, the silence in the shop was deafening. The sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the room. I stood there for a long time, unsure of what to do next. In that moment, everything had changed. My life, the one I thought I understood, the one I had worked so hard to build, was unraveling. I didn't know what I would find when I went to New York, but I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. The only thing I could do now was move forward. The truth was out there, and I had to find it, no matter where it led. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in the back of my shop, trying to process everything Hayes had told me. The phone call had left me reeling. I was still staring at the same workbench, the one that had felt so familiar just hours ago. The sound of the overhead fan buzzing softly in the background did little to calm the chaos in my mind. A small, quiet town in Ohio had always felt like my world. Now, it felt too small, too far removed from everything I was learning. I stood up and paced across the room, running my hands over the rough edges of an old rocking chair I was restoring. The scent of linseed oil and fresh, cut wood usually grounded me, but not today. Today, nothing made sense. I felt like I was living in someone else's life, a life that belonged to someone I didn't even know, someone who had been searching for me for years. My biological father, Edmund Hollister, had built an empire. A man I never knew existed, yet who had somehow known about me. He had spent the last months of his life trying to find me, and I hadn't even known he was out there. I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of man was Edmund Hollister? Hayes had described him as a self-made billionaire, someone who had built an industrial empire from nothing. He had money, power, influence. I couldn't even begin to fathom the life he had led, and yet somehow I was a part of it now. The phone call had come at a time when my life was predictable, simple. I ran a small furniture restoration shop. I wasn't famous. I had a comfortable life, one I had worked hard to build. My wife Meredith and I had our routines. I went to the shop early every morning. I made coffee in a machine that had seen better days, and I worked on the pieces people brought me. There was a certain satisfaction in bringing something old back to life, but it was nothing compared to the life I now found myself tangled in. The more I thought about it, the more questions kept bubbling to the surface. Why had Edmund never reached out before? Why had Vivien, his wife, gone to such extremes to block me from the will? If he had wanted to find me, why wait until the end of his life to do it? And what kind of woman was Vivien, to go so far as to erase me completely from his world? I needed answers, and now I was tangled in a mess I didn't even know how to begin untangling. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced at the screen. It was Meredith. She had been waiting for me to call her back, but I couldn't bring myself to do it just yet. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell her that the life we had built together was suddenly crumbling? I hesitated, then tapped the screen to answer. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to sound casual, though the words felt foreign coming out of my mouth. Meredith replied, her voice light and warm. "How's it going? You sound different. What's wrong?" I didn't know how to start. "Mary, I got a call today. From a lawyer." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "A lawyer? Why? What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I found out that, well, my biological father, the one who gave me up for adoption, he's dead. And apparently, he's left me everything. The whole estate." Meredith was quiet for a moment. I could practically hear her mind racing. "What do you mean everything?" she asked carefully. I swallowed hard, the weight of the words hitting me all over again. His yacht, his penthouse, his company. $94 million. And Vivien Hollister, his wife, she tried to block me from getting any of it. She filed a petition to remove my name from the will, but they found out what she did. Meredith's voice softened. "Oh my God, that's a lot to take in. Are you okay?" I didn't know how to answer that. How could I be okay when everything I thought I knew about my life had just been flipped upside down? "I don't know," I said, my voice quiet. I'm still trying to figure out how all this fits together. It's like I'm living someone else's life." There was a long pause. "Do you want me to come over?" "No," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. I didn't want her to see me like this, not yet. Not when everything felt so overwhelming. "I need to think about all of this first. I have to go to New York. I'm meeting with the lawyer." Meredith didn't say anything for a moment, but I could hear her breathing. I knew she was trying to process it too. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "We'll figure this out. I'll be here when you get back." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thanks, Mer. I'll call you when I get there." I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, staring out the window at the cornfields behind my shop. The world outside hadn't changed, but everything inside my head felt like it was in freefall. I hadn't asked for any of this. I didn't want to be tied to some billionaire's legacy. I didn't even know the man. But somehow, I was now tied to him by blood, by DNA, by a lawyer's phone call. I didn't know what I was going to find when I got to New York. But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't ignore this. The truth was out there, waiting for me, and I had to face it, whether I was ready or not. I took one last look at the shop, then grabbed my coat and keys. It was time to figure out who I really was, and what my life was going to look like from here on out. The flight to New York felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was the anticipation gnawing at me, or maybe it was the weight of the unknown pressing down on my chest. I kept thinking about the phone call, about the inheritance, about Vivien Hollister and the life I never knew existed. It all seemed too surreal. How had I gone from restoring old furniture in a small town to being the heir to a multi-million-dollar empire? And why did this woman, Vivien, want me erased so badly? I stared out the plane window at the clouds below, watching them roll by like a soft, endless ocean. I wasn't even sure what I was expecting to find when I arrived in New York. A family I never knew. Or was I just walking into a world full of secrets that would only leave me more confused than before? I landed late in the afternoon, and the moment I stepped off the plane, the bustling energy of the city hit me. The air was thick with the scent of concrete and exhaust, the hum of traffic and people moving quickly. I had no idea where I was going or what to expect, but I followed the signs to baggage claim, grabbed my suitcase, and made my way out of the airport. Hayes Moreland had arranged for a car to pick me up. The driver was a middle-aged man with a thick accent who didn't say much. He simply nodded when I got in and started driving. I didn't know what to say to him, so I just stared out the window, watching the city flash by. The skyscrapers seemed to rise higher the closer we got to downtown. The streets were alive with energy, people rushing in every direction, taxis honking, lights flashing, and the occasional street performer adding a touch of color to the chaos. New York City felt like a different world altogether, a world where everything was bigger, louder, and faster. It felt like a dream, like I was just a visitor in a place I didn't belong. The driver turned onto a side street and stopped in front of a sleek, glass building. Hayes had told me his office was on the 47th floor, but even from the outside, it looked more like a palace than an office building. The doors were wide and polished, the kind you see in movies. I could feel my stomach tighten as I stepped out of the car and walked through the entrance. Inside, the lobby was spotless and bright, with marble floors and towering glass windows that let in a flood of light. I approached the front desk, where a young woman with a perfectly poised smile asked if I was there to see Mr. Moreland. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Colton Marsh. I'm here to meet with him." The receptionist nodded and motioned to the elevators. "Mr. Moreland is expecting you. You can take the elevator up to the 47th floor. He'll be waiting for you." I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 47th floor. As the doors closed, I glanced at myself in the mirror. The man staring back at me seemed like a stranger. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Was I just the guy who restored old furniture in Ohio, or was I Edmund Hollister's son, a man now tied to a fortune I didn't ask for? The elevator dinned, and the doors opened to a sleek, modern floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a panoramic view of the city below. Hayes Moreland was standing by the large conference table, dressed in a sharp suit that matched the high-end atmosphere of the office. He had silver hair and a firm handshake. "Mr. Marsh," he said, his voice calm and professional. "It's good to meet you in person." I shook his hand, still feeling out of place. "Thank you for arranging this," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Hayes motioned for me to sit at the table. "Please have a seat. There's much to discuss." I sat down, my hands gripping the edge of the chair. Hayes opened a folder in front of him and began pulling out documents, legal papers, photos, and a small wooden box. He slid the box across the table to me. "I assume you're aware that your father left you everything," Hayes began, "but there's more to it than just the money." I nodded slowly. "I don't even know where to start with this. Why didn't he ever try to find me before?" Hayes paused, then leaned back in his chair. "Your father did try to find you, Colton. It's just that Vivien, your father's wife, made sure he couldn't. She blocked every attempt he made to search for you. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he finally took matters into his own hands. He hired investigators, searched for leads, and found you just 11 days before his death." I felt a chill run through me. Edmund Hollister had spent his last days searching for me, and the woman he had married had done everything she could to keep me from him. Hayes continued, "Before he died, your father rewrote his will. He wanted you to have everything, Colton. The company, the house, the yacht, the money. But Vivien couldn't allow that to happen. She fought it every step of the way." I looked down at the wooden box in front of me. I could tell it held something important, something that might shed light on the story I had just begun to uncover. I opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of letters, each one dated for a different year. Hayes spoke again, his voice soft. "These are letters your mother, Renata, wrote to you every year on your birthday. She never sent them, but she wrote to every single year. She wanted you to know that you were loved." I took the first letter out of the box, my fingers trembling as I unfolded it. My mother's handwriting was neat and elegant, a stark contrast to the messy emotions that swirled inside me. The letter began, "To my dear son on your first birthday." I couldn't read the rest. Not yet. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about a family I never knew, a past I never understood, and a future I wasn't sure I was ready for. But one thing was certain: I had come to New York for answers, and I wasn't going to leave until I had them. I didn't sleep much that night. The weight of everything, my father's inheritance, Vivien's betrayal, the letters from my mother swirled around in my head, keeping me awake. I had barely landed in New York, and already, my world was spinning. Hayes had been right. There was so much more to the story than I could have ever imagined. I woke up early the next morning, my mind still heavy with questions. The morning light filtered through the curtains of my hotel room, casting a soft glow on the modern furniture. I could hear the distant hum of traffic outside, a constant reminder that I wasn't in Ohio anymore. New York was alive, a city that never stopped moving. But here I was, standing still, trying to piece together the fragments of a life I never knew existed. I pulled myself together, showered, and dressed in the best clothes I had brought with me. The thought of showing up in front of Hayes again, the man who had already seen me as a confused mess, made me self-conscious. I needed to look like I was ready for what was coming, even if I wasn't sure I was. I grabbed a quick breakfast from the hotel lobby, a bagel and coffee, and then made my way back to Hayes' office. The elevator ride was quiet, the air thick with tension. When the doors opened to the 47th floor again, I stepped into the sleek, modern office building and made my way down the long hall to Hayes' door. I knocked lightly, and the door opened almost immediately. Hayes looked up from a stack of papers on his desk and gestured for me to come in. "Good morning, Mr. Marsh," he said with a polite smile, though his eyes betrayed the seriousness of the situation. "I'm glad you could make it. We have a lot to discuss." I nodded, stepping inside and taking a seat across from him. He closed the file he'd been working on and looked at me, as if deciding where to begin. "There's something I think you should know before we proceed," Hayes said, his voice steady. "Your father, Edmund Hollister, spent the last months of his life trying to find you. He was determined to make up for the years he missed with you, to make sure you knew the truth about your birth and your place in his life. But Vivien, his wife, did everything she could to stop that." I sat back in my chair, absorbing his words. Edmund had wanted to find me. He hadn't abandoned me out of apathy. For so long I had believed that my biological father had simply walked away. But now I was learning that wasn't the case. He had been searching for me, and I had never even known. Hayes continued. Vivien tried to block his every attempt. She feared that if your existence came to light, it would ruin everything she had built with Edmund. She manipulated him into believing that acknowledging you would destroy his reputation, his business. And when he found out the truth, when he finally accepted that he had a son, she fought him every step of the way. My mind raced. Vivien had been the one to keep me hidden. She had been the one to convince Edmund to abandon me, to make sure I never knew the life I could have had. The woman who had been married to him for years had been the one to pull the strings. She had created the lie I had been living. I don't understand, I said, my voice breaking through the silence. Why did she do that? Why keep me hidden? What was she so afraid of? Hayes paused, his eyes softening. She was afraid of losing everything. Edmund was an ambitious man, a man who built his empire from the ground up. He was driven by success, by reputation. And Vivien, she was always looking over her shoulder, worried that someone would come along and take it all away. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly together. And what about me? Why did he never reach out? Why wait until the end of his life to try to find me? Hayes shifted in his chair, glancing down at the papers in front of him. Edmund didn't know how to reconcile his past with the life he had built with Vivien. When he learned the truth, it was too late for him to undo the damage. But when he got sick, when he realized his time was running out, he couldn't live with the regret any longer. He wanted you to know that he was sorry, that he never wanted to abandon you. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. He wanted to leave you something to make up for the years he couldn't give you. I felt a lump form in my throat. I wasn't sure how to process what I was hearing. Edmund had wanted to make things right, but Vivien had blocked him at every turn. Hayes slid a folder across the table to me. This is a copy of the will your father left. It's been contested, but we have all the evidence we need to prove that you are his son, and that you are entitled to everything he left behind. I opened the folder, my hands trembling slightly as I scanned the pages. There, in black and white, were the words that changed everything. The inheritance, the estate, the company, the yacht, it was all mine now. I was the heir to a fortune I never asked for, a life I never knew. But there was more to this than just money. There's something else you need to understand, Colton, Hayes said, his voice low. Your mother, Renata, she left you something too. I looked up from the will, my curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Hayes opened a small box that had been sitting on the desk. Inside were more letters. Your mother wrote to you every year on your birthday. 35 letters. She never sent them, but she kept writing. She wanted you to know that you were loved. I took the first letter out, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. The handwriting was delicate, full of emotion, and as I read the words, I could feel the weight of her love. To my dear son, on your first birthday. The letter was dated the day after I was born, and as I read each word, a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My mother had never forgotten me. She had never stopped loving me, even though she couldn't keep me. I looked back at Hayes, my heart heavy with emotion. What happened to her? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Hayes paused for a moment before answering. She passed away 5 years ago from ovarian cancer. She never stopped hoping you would find these letters. And she never stopped hoping you would understand that giving you up wasn't because she didn't love you. It was because she wanted a better life for you. I let the letter fall onto the table, my mind spinning. My mother, the woman who had given me life, had wanted me to know that I was loved. She had never given up on me, even though circumstances had torn us apart. And now, I was left with the echoes of a love I had never known, but had always been there, waiting for me to find it. I left Hayes' office with a head full of questions and a heart weighed down by things I never thought I'd have to deal with. The letters from my mother sat heavy in my hand, and the knowledge that Edmund Hollister had spent his last months searching for me felt like a burden. I had a fortune waiting for me, a life that had always been out of reach, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't prepared for this world, this truth, that had been hidden from me for so long. The streets of New York felt even more chaotic as I left the building. The noise of the city, the honking taxis, the clatter of pedestrians rushing by, it all felt distant now, as if I were in a fog, detached from the world around me. I was still trying to process everything: the inheritance, the will, Vivien's deception, and most of all my biological parents. I walked through the streets, not really knowing where I was going. The weight of my new reality pressed on me. I had always considered myself a simple man. I worked with my hands, restoring old furniture that had stories to tell. It was a job I loved, a job that gave me purpose, even if it didn't bring in millions of dollars. And yet, now I was tied to a man I never knew, a man who'd left me everything I didn't ask for. I found a small park to sit in, the bustle of the city distant behind me. The bench was cold, the air crisp. I pulled the letters from the wooden box and began reading them, one by one. The first was dated the day after my birth. It was written by my mother, Renata. Her handwriting was elegant, full of love and longing. To my dear son, on your first birthday. The letter began. I am so sorry I couldn't keep you. I think about you every single day and I wonder where you are, what you look like, and if you know how much I love you. Please know that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. I did it because I wanted you to have a better life. I hope, wherever you are, you're happy. I set the letter down on the bench beside me, my mind spinning. My mother had never forgotten me. She had never stopped thinking about me, even though she couldn't raise me. She had loved me. And now, 35 years later, I was reading her words that she had written to me every year on my birthday. She had never sent them, but she had written them, all the same. I was wanted, even when I didn't know it. The second letter was written when I was 5. She talked about how much she hoped I was happy with my adoptive family, that they loved me as their own. But in every letter, I could feel the pain she carried. The guilt of not being able to keep me. The hope that I had ended up somewhere safe, somewhere full of love. I read through the letters, each one a window into her heart. Each letter was filled with love, regret, and hope. It was clear she had spent her entire life wondering about me, imagining what I had become. She had written about watching other children and wondering if one of them was me. She had written about the day she had signed the adoption papers, how she cried until she was sedated. But there was one letter that struck me more than the others. It was the last letter, dated just 6 months before her death. I don't know if you'll ever read these words. She wrote, but I want you to know that giving you up didn't mean I didn't want you. I was young, scared, and broke. Your father's family made it clear there was no place for us in his world. And I've spent every day since hoping you landed somewhere soft, somewhere full of love. You were chosen, my sweet boy. You were chosen by me to have a better life. I hope you know that. I could feel the tears welling in my eyes as I read her words. The truth of her love hit me all at once. She had wanted me. She had never stopped loving me. She had given me up, not because she didn't want me, but because she wanted me to have a better life. And now, after all these years, I was learning that I had never been abandoned. I had been loved. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel anger. Why hadn't anyone told me this sooner? Why hadn't Edmund or Vivien, or anyone, said something? Why had this truth been hidden from me for so long? I put the letters back in the box and closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I couldn't let myself get lost in the anger. I had to move forward. My life wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. The inheritance, the family I never knew, the business that had been left to me. It was all part of my story now, and I needed to figure out where I fit into it. I stood up from the bench, the cold air hitting my face. I felt like I had taken the first step into a new life, a life that was filled with uncertainty, but also with the possibility of something more. I had no idea what that something would look like, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had to face the truth, all of it, and I would start by meeting Vivien Hollister. The thought of confronting her made my stomach twist. She had tried to erase me. She had spent years hiding me from Edmund, from everyone. But now, I was going to face her. I needed to know why she had done what she did, and I needed to know if she felt any remorse for the way she had treated me. I took a deep breath and walked back toward the hotel. The city seemed to have slowed down as I walked through it, the noise and the people fading into the background. All I could focus on was the truth that was finally coming to light. The next morning, the weight of everything I had learned from Hayes, from the letters, felt like a heavy fog around me as I prepared to meet Vivien Hollister. I hadn't spoken to Meredith much the night before. She had stayed at the hotel, giving me space, but I could feel the questions bubbling up every time I caught her gaze. What had she thought of the inheritance? Of the family I had never known? I couldn't answer those questions yet, not until I had answers of my own. I woke up early, feeling restless and unsure. The city outside my hotel room window was just beginning to stir. The sun was still low, casting a soft golden light over the skyline. New York, a city of endless energy, felt like it was pulsing with life, but I felt isolated, like I was standing on the edge of something, waiting to fall. I walked to the cafe downstairs, the smell of freshly brewed coffee cutting through the quiet morning air. As I sat at a small table by the window, I took out the letter from my mother again. I had read it multiple times the night before, but every time I went back to it, I found something new, a deeper layer of her love, her regret, her hope. I could feel her presence in those words, even though I would never meet her. But today wasn't about the past anymore. Today was about Vivien, the woman who had tried to erase me from the story of Edmund Hollister's life. The woman who had kept me hidden for so long, who had worked tirelessly to keep me from knowing the truth. I had to know why. I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth filling my senses, and let my thoughts settle. The confrontation with Vivien was inevitable. I had to hear it from her, hear her side of the story. I had to know if there was any truth to the things Hayes had said. If she had been scared, if she had been trying to protect her life with Edmund, or if there was something deeper, something darker that I hadn't yet uncovered. The car ride to the Hollister estate was a blur. I barely remembered the streets we passed, or the driver's quiet voice when he told me we were almost there. My thoughts were consumed by the meeting ahead. The grand, imposing gates that led to the estate were just visible as we turned onto a long, winding driveway, lined with towering trees. The house itself was something out of a magazine, a sprawling mansion surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens and rolling lawns. It felt unreal, like I was stepping into someone else's world. As the driver pulled up to the front of the house, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The mansion stood before me like a symbol of everything I had never known, everything that had been hidden from me. I had no idea what Vivien would say, or if she would even let me in. But I had to try. I had to face her, even if it was uncomfortable. I stepped out of the car, the crisp air hitting my face as I made my way to the front door. A housekeeper answered when I rang the bell, her expression polite but distant. She led me through a grand foyer, with gleaming marble floors and high ceilings that seemed to stretch forever. The smell of fresh flowers lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of wood polish. The house was beautiful, but it felt cold, empty somehow, like it had been built for show, not for warmth. I was led into a sitting room with velvet furniture, the walls adorned with oil paintings and sculptures. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the central heating system. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence felt oppressive, heavy. I didn't know if I was ready for what was coming next. Vivien walked in after a few minutes, tall and composed, her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun. She was the picture of elegance, dressed in a tailored suit that looked expensive without being ostentatious. Her sharp blue eyes studied me, her face unreadable. "So," she said, her voice calm, though there was a tightness to it, "you're the son." I didn't say anything right away, I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. There she was, the woman who had made sure I stayed hidden, the woman who had kept me from knowing my father, the woman who had tried to erase me. Vivien. I finally said, my voice steady despite the flood of emotions inside me. Why did you do it?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she sat down across from me, crossing her legs elegantly. Her posture was perfect, controlled. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something cold, something calculating. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice quiet but pointed. I nodded. "I need to understand." She sighed, her eyes drifting momentarily to the window, as though she was considering her words carefully. "Edmund and I built a life together. A life that was hard-earned. I supported him when no one else did. When Renata showed up pregnant with you, he was torn between his reputation, his future, and what was right, and I convinced him to do what we both knew had to be done." She paused, her gaze locking with mine. "You were a threat, Colton, a reminder of a past that couldn't be acknowledged if we were going to build the empire we did. Edmund loved Renata, I could see it in his eyes, but he couldn't afford to acknowledge you. So, I made sure he didn't." Her words hit me like a slap. I had always imagined her as a villain, but hearing her say it so plainly, it was chilling. She wasn't just a manipulator, she was a woman who had seen me as an obstacle. And she was admitting it without any remorse. "I did it to protect him," she continued, her voice hardening. "I did it because I couldn't let him lose everything he had worked for, because of a mistake that wasn't mine to fix. But he was always looking for you. I knew it, and I had to stop him. And when I found out he had rewritten his will, when I realized that everything he built was going to you, I couldn't let that happen." I felt a knot form in my stomach, a sickening sense of betrayal crawling through me. "You've spent 35 years hiding me, Vivien. Why? What was I to you?" Her eyes flickered with some guilt. Regret. It was gone too quickly for me to tell, but it was there just for a moment. "You were the reminder of something I couldn't change. Something I thought I could erase," she said softly. "I never wanted to hurt you, Colton, but you were never supposed to be part of this world. And now it's too late." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. The truth had been laid bare before me, but it felt hollow. It didn't bring the answers I was hoping for. It didn't bring closure. I stood up, the urge to leave suddenly overwhelming. I had heard what I needed to hear. But it didn't make the hurt go away. It didn't make the years of being hidden feel any less painful. I don't know what to do with this, Vivien. I said, my voice low. I don't know what to do with any of this. She didn't reply. Instead, she stood up slowly, walking to a side table where she picked up a small wooden box. She held it out to me. Your father wanted you to have this, she said, her voice softer now. I couldn't stop him from finding you. I couldn't stop him from leaving it to you. I took the box from her hands, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It was the same box I had seen on Hayes' desk. It felt different now, though. He had wanted me to have it, despite everything. I turned to leave, the weight of the truth settling heavily on my shoulders. Vivien's presence faded as I walked out of the room, but her words lingered. There was no going back now. The past was a tangled mess, and it wasn't done with me yet. But for the first time, I felt like I could start unraveling it. The next few days felt like a blur. I kept replaying the conversation with Vivien in my mind over and over again, trying to make sense of it all. The house, the wealth, the power. None of it felt real. It was as if someone had plucked me out of my quiet, predictable life and dropped me into a world of opulence and deceit. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Vivien wasn't the only one responsible for the mess I had found myself in. Edmund, too, had kept secrets from me, secrets that had shaped the course of my entire life. I went back to the hotel that evening, the box of letters from my mother still tucked under my arm. It felt like I was carrying a part of her with me, her love, her regret, her hope. But it also felt like I was carrying a weight that had been placed on me by others. Vivien, Edmund, even fate itself had conspired to keep me in the dark for 35 years. I set the box down on the hotel room's small desk and stared at it for a while. I knew I should open it again, read the letters, try to piece together the parts of me that I didn't understand. But I wasn't ready. The weight of the truth was still too much, and I couldn't shake the feeling that by uncovering it all, I might lose a part of myself that I didn't want to let go of. The following morning, I met with Hayes again. He had arranged a meeting with the lawyers handling the estate, and I needed to get my bearings before the final decisions were made. The car ride there felt long and quiet, and I was lost in thought. My mind kept wandering back to the life I had left behind in Ohio, the quiet mornings, the smell of sawdust in the shop, the simple pleasure of restoring old furniture. But it wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the yacht, the penthouse, or the company I was now the heir to. It was about the family I never knew, the family that had kept me hidden, and the man I thought I knew as my father, Warren, my adoptive dad, who had always been there for me, who had loved me unconditionally. I didn't know how to reconcile the two worlds I was now living in. Could I still be the same man I was before? Or had this inheritance, these revelations, changed everything? Hayes greeted me in the lobby of a sleek office building, his usual calm demeanor present as always. He led me into a large conference room, where several people were already seated around a long table. They were lawyers, all suited up, looking as if they had been waiting for me. The air in the room felt tense, filled with anticipation, but I could also sense an undercurrent of skepticism. They all knew what was at stake, but they didn't know who I was. I took a seat at the head of the table, my palms sweating as I laid the papers out in front of me. Hayes, who had been handling most of the legal details so far, sat beside me, his presence a quiet reassurance. But even with him there, I couldn't help but feel out of place. I wasn't a businessman. I wasn't a billionaire's son. I was a man who fixed things, who worked with wood and nails, who found joy in restoring the broken. "We've reviewed the will," one of the lawyers began, looking at me over his glasses. "And as per Edmund Hollister's wishes, everything he owned is now in your hands. The company, the estate, the yacht, it's all yours." The words should have felt empowering, but they only served to make me feel smaller, more uncertain. I nodded though, trying to process what this all meant. Hayes had already briefed me on most of it, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "Vivien Hollister, your father's wife, has contested the will," the lawyer continued, his voice cold and professional. "She has claimed that your inclusion in the inheritance is based on fraudulent evidence. She is prepared to fight this in court." My chest tightened. I had known Vivien would fight it, but hearing it laid out in front of me made it more concrete. "And what about the letters?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Hayes shifted in his seat. "We have the letters your mother wrote. They will help establish your connection to Edmund. The issue isn't the inheritance itself, it's Vivien's attempt to erase you from his life. She doesn't want you to have any claim to what's rightfully yours." A heavy silence fell over the room. I could feel the weight of the lawyer's gazes on me, and though I had never been in a situation like this before, something about the way they looked made me feel as if I were an outsider. Like I wasn't supposed to be here, sitting at the head of the table, about to make decisions that would change my life and the lives of everyone connected to this legacy. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. The legal battle will take time, Mr. Marsh. There are options for mediation, but Vivien is adamant. She's claiming that the estate should go to her, as Edmund's widow, and that you should be removed from the will entirely. We'll need to prepare for a lengthy legal process. I looked around at the room full of strangers, the weight of their expectations hanging over me. I had no desire for any of this, no desire to fight over money or assets, no desire to claim a life that wasn't mine to begin with. But I couldn't let Vivien take it all away. I couldn't let her control the story of who I was. I'm not interested in fighting for the money, I said, my voice finally steady. But I want what's mine. I want the truth. And I won't let anyone take that from me. Hayes gave me a small nod of approval. The room fell quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different. It felt like a beginning, not an end. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to back down. The truth was worth more than anything Vivien could ever try to take from me,